They raised you, taught you how to walk, how to speak, how to survive in a world you didn't yet understand. And for that, you were told to be grateful, always grateful. But no one ever prepared you for the quiet contradictions, the moments when the same voices that guided you also made you doubt yourself. The same hands that protected you slowly became the ones you feared disappointing the most. You learned to smile when it hurt, to agree when it felt wrong, to shrink just enough to keep the peace. And somewhere in that silent obedience, a question began to echo, soft at first, but impossible to ignore. What happens when the people who built you are also the ones who broke you? They gave you everything you were taught to value: food on the table, a roof over your head, lessons about right and wrong. From the outside, it looked complete. It looked like care, and in many ways it was. But beneath that surface, there was something quieter, something harder to name. Because while they were providing for you, they were also shaping you in ways you didn't fully understand at the time. Not just guiding you, but molding you. Not just protecting you, but controlling the parts of you that didn't fit their comfort. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It was in the small moments, the opinions you weren't allowed to have, the choices that were already made for you before you could even think about them. You were told what was best for you, who you should become, how you should act, what you should believe. And because you were young, because you trusted them, you accepted it without question. You believed that love looked like obedience, that approval was something you had to earn by becoming exactly what they expected. So you adjusted, quietly, carefully. You learned to read their moods, to anticipate their reactions, to shape your words in ways that would keep everything calm. You became skilled at avoiding conflict, not because you were weak, but because you understood even then that peace often came at the cost of your own voice. And over time, that voice grew softer, less certain, until it felt safer not to use it at all. What made it harder was that it didn't feel like harm, not clearly, not obviously, because there were moments of warmth, of care, of genuine love, and those moments made everything else confusing. They made you question your own feelings. How could something that looked like love also make you feel so small? How could the people who wanted the best for you also make you feel like you were never enough? So you didn't question it. You turned inward instead. You assumed the problem must be you. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe you expected too much. Maybe this was just how life worked. And in that quiet acceptance, you began to lose pieces of yourself. Not all at once, but slowly, like something fading in the background. You became what they needed, the version of you that kept things smooth, that avoided tension, that didn't ask for too much. And for a while it worked. It kept the peace, it kept the approval coming, but it also left you with a quiet emptiness you couldn't explain, because deep down there was always a part of you that knew you weren't fully there. You were present, but not complete. And that's the part no one talks about. The way control can hide behind care, the way love can become tangled with expectation, the way a person can be shaped so carefully by others that they forget how to shape themselves. It doesn't mean there was no love. It doesn't mean everything was wrong, but it does mean that somewhere along the way, your freedom was quietly traded for acceptance. And now, whether you realize it or not, you carry that with you. In the way you hesitate, in the way you second guess your own choices, in the way you still seek approval, even when no one is asking for it. Because when you're raised to believe that love must be earned, you spend a lifetime trying to deserve it, even when you already do. You didn't choose silence, and you learned it slowly, carefully, like a skill that kept you safe. At first, it was just hesitation, a moment where you almost spoke, but something inside you said, "Not now." Then it became a pattern. You began to notice which words caused tension, which truths made the room colder, which emotions were met with discomfort instead of understanding. And without anyone clearly saying it, you understood the message. Some parts of you were easier to accept when they stayed hidden. So you adapted. You started filtering yourself before anyone else could. You measured your tone, softened your opinions, and sometimes erased them completely. Not because you had nothing to say, but because saying it felt like a risk you couldn't afford. You told yourself it was maturity, that staying quiet meant being respectful, that avoiding conflict meant you were doing the right thing. And for a while it worked. It kept things calm. It kept relationships intact. It kept you from becoming the source of discomfort. But silence has a cost, and it doesn't demand payment all at once. It collects slowly over time. Every time you held back your truth, a part of you felt unseen. Every time you dismissed your own feelings to make space for someone else's, you moved a little further away from yourself. You became present in every room, but never fully there. You listened, you nodded, you agreed. But inside, there was a quiet distance growing between who you were and who you allowed yourself to be. What makes it more complex is that People begin to expect your silence. They grow comfortable with the version of you that doesn't challenge, doesn't resist, doesn't disrupt the balance. They see you as easy, as understanding, as someone who never causes problems. And while that might sound like praise, it comes with an unspoken condition that you continue to stay that way, that you don't suddenly find your voice and change the dynamic they've grown used to. And so, even when you start to feel the weight of it, speaking up feels unfamiliar, almost wrong. Your thoughts feel louder in your mind than they do when you try to express them. You second guess your words before they even leave your mouth. You wonder if you're overreacting, if you're making something out of nothing, if it's even worth saying at all. Because when you spent so long being quiet, your own voice can start to feel like a stranger. But here's the truth that often goes unspoken. Silence is not the same as peace. It may look calm from the outside, but inside it can be filled with tension, with unspoken thoughts, with emotions that have nowhere to go. It protects you in the moment, yes, but over time it begins to confine you. It teaches you that your role is to absorb, not to express, to understand others, but not to be understood. And yet, somewhere beneath all that quiet, your voice is still there. It hasn't disappeared, it's just been waiting, waiting for the moment you realize that being heard is not a threat to peace, that expressing yourself is not an act of rebellion, that your thoughts, your feelings, your truth were never meant to be hidden in the first place. You were not just taught how to love, you were taught how to endure. And somewhere along the way, those two things became so tightly connected that you could no longer tell the difference. Love, to you, was not just warmth or understanding. It was patience without limits, tolerance without boundaries, sacrifice without question. You learned that staying, no matter how it felt, was a sign of loyalty, that walking away, even when it hurt you, meant you were doing something wrong. It started with small ideas that sounded noble on the surface. Respect your elders, don't talk back, family comes first, and none of those are wrong in themselves. But when they are stretched beyond balance, they begin to reshape how you see your own needs. You begin to believe that your comfort is less important, your voice less necessary, your boundaries less valid. You start to think that love is proven by how much you can tolerate, not by how much you are valued. So you carried that belief into everything. You stayed in conversations that drained you, relationships that confused you, situations that made you feel small. And when something inside you whispered that this wasn't right, you silenced it with guilt. You told yourself you were being ungrateful, too sensitive, too demanding, because deep down you were afraid that choosing yourself would mean losing the very love you were trying so hard to protect. What made it even more difficult was how normal it all felt. When you grow up believing that love requires sacrifice, you don't question the weight you carry. You accept it. You become the one who gives more, understands more, forgives more. You take pride in your ability to hold everything together, even when you are quietly falling apart. And others begin to rely on that strength, not realizing that it comes at a cost you never agreed to pay. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that comes from this, not physical, but emotional, the kind that settles in your chest when you realize you've been pouring into others without ever feeling full yourself. You start to wonder why your needs feel so difficult to express, why asking for basic understanding feels like asking for too much. And the answer is not that you are demanding, it's that you were never taught that your needs matter just as much. Over time, the lines blur even more. You start confusing obligation with connection. You stay not because it feels right, but because leaving feels wrong. You give not because you want to, but because you feel you have to. And in that quiet confusion, love becomes something heavy, something tied to responsibility rather than freedom. But here is the part that changes everything. Real love does not require you to disappear. It does not ask you to silence your needs or abandon your sense of self. It does not measure your worth by how much you can endure. The moment you begin to understand that, the moment you see that love and suffering were never meant to be the same, something shifts inside you. You begin to question what you once accepted without thought. You begin to notice where you've been giving too much and receiving too little. And for the first time, you allow yourself to consider a different possibility, that love can exist without guilt, without fear, without the constant need to prove your loyalty through sacrifice. And that realization, quiet as it may be, is where your freedom begins. Not every wound announces itself. Some arrive quietly, settle deep, and learn to live within you without ever being seen. There are no visible scars, no stories that people immediately recognize as pain. From the outside, everything looks fine. You function, you smile, you carry on. But inside, there is a different reality, one shaped by moments that were never fully understood, never fully processed, never fully healed. It shows up in ways that are easy to overlook, in the hesitation before you make a decision, even a small one, in the way you question yourself after speaking, replaying your words as if you might have done something wrong, in the constant need to be sure, to be certain, to avoid making mistakes that feel heavier than they should. It's not that you lack ability, it's that somewhere along the way, you were taught to doubt it. You may not even remember when it started. There wasn't one defining moment, but many small ones layered over time. Subtle dismissals, unnoticed efforts, feelings that were brushed aside or misunderstood. Each one, on its own, seemed insignificant, but together they created something lasting, a quiet belief that who you are might not be enough unless it is adjusted, refined, or approved by someone else. And so you adapted in ways that became invisible, even to you. You became more careful, more aware, more tuned into others than into yourself. You learned how to read the room, how to sense shifts in tone, how to respond in ways that would keep everything steady. It made you perceptive, yes, but it also made you cautious. You started prioritizing harmony over honesty, comfort over authenticity. There is also a certain loneliness that comes with this kind of experience. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of not being fully known. Because when you hide parts of yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your struggles, you create a distance that others cannot see, but you can feel. You can be surrounded by people and still sense that there is a part of you that remains untouched, unrecognized. Over time, this begins to shape how you see your own worth. You measure yourself through the reactions of others. You look for reassurance outside because it was never firmly built within. And when that reassurance is missing even briefly, it can feel unsettling, as if something essential has been taken away. That's the nature of unseen wounds. They don't just stay in the past, they echo into the present. What makes it even more challenging is that these patterns feel normal. You don't always recognize them as something that needs attention. You simply see them as part of who you are. But they are not your identity. They are responses, learned ways of navigating an environment that didn't always give you the space to fully be yourself. And yet, within all of this, there is something steady, something unchanged. Beneath the doubt, beneath the hesitation, beneath the need for approval, there is still a sense of self that was never damaged, only covered. The thoughts you held back, the feelings you silenced, the parts of you that waited quietly, they are still there. Recognizing these unseen wounds is not about assigning blame or reopening the past. It's about understanding how those experiences shaped you so they no longer define you. Because once you begin to see them clearly, they lose their quiet control. And what was once hidden starts to become something you can finally face and eventually release. There comes a moment in your life that doesn't announce itself loudly. No dramatic turning point, no sudden clarity that changes everything overnight. It's quieter than that, almost unnoticeable at first. A shift in the way you think, a pause before you react, a question that rises within you instead of being pushed away. And in that moment, something begins to change, not around you, but within you. You start to see things differently. Patterns you once accepted without thought begin to stand out. The way you've always responded, the way you've always adjusted yourself to fit expectations, it no longer feels automatic. There's a subtle resistance now, a quiet awareness that asks, why have I been doing this? And for the first time, you don't rush to silence that question, you let it stay. This is where the real shift begins, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in understanding. You begin to realize that healing is not about rejecting where you came from. It's not about denying the care, the effort, or the moments of love that existed. It's about recognizing that some parts of your experience shaped you in ways that no longer serve you. And acknowledging that truth doesn't make you ungrateful, it makes you aware. There is a certain strength in that awareness, because once you see clearly, you can no longer move blindly. You begin to notice when you are shrinking yourself out of habit, when you are staying silent out of fear, when you are giving more than you truly have to give. And instead of judging yourself for it, you start to understand it. You see where it came from. You see why it became part of you. But understanding alone is not enough. At some point, you are faced with a choice, a quiet but powerful decision, whether to continue living in the patterns you've always known or to slowly begin stepping beyond them. And stepping beyond them doesn't mean everything changes at once. It means small, intentional moments, saying what you truly think, even if your voice feels unfamiliar, choosing rest instead of constant responsibility, allowing yourself to exist without always trying to earn your place. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, even wrong, because anything unfamiliar often does. You might question yourself, wonder if you're doing too much, if you're changing too quickly, if you're somehow becoming someone you're not. But the truth is, you're not becoming someone new, you're returning to someone who was always there, beneath the layers of expectation and adaptation. And perhaps the most important part of this process is realizing that choosing yourself does not mean you are breaking everything around you. It doesn't mean you are abandoning others or turning away from what matters. It simply means you are no longer abandoning yourself. You are no longer placing your worth in the hands of approval or your peace in the hands of silence. There is a quiet kind of freedom in that. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The kind that allows you to breathe a little easier, to think a little clearer, to feel a little more grounded in who you are. And once you experience that, even briefly, you begin to understand something important. That healing is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming present in your own life, without fear, without guilt, and without losing yourself in the process.